Esther's Beauty and Piety by Ginzberg. The birth of Esther caused the death of her mother. Her father had died a little while before, so she was entirely orphaned. Mordecai and his wife interested themselves in the poor babe. His wife became her nurse, and he himself did not hesitate, when there was need for it, to do services for the child that are usually performed only by women. 66. Both her names, Esther as well as Hadassah, are descriptive of her virtues. Hadassah, or myrtle, she is called, because her good deeds spread her fame abroad, as the sweet fragrance of the myrtle pervades the air in which it grows. In general, the myrtle is symbolic of the pious, because, as the myrtle is ever green summer and winter alike, so the saints never suffer dishonor, either in this world or in the world to come. In another way, Esther resembled the myrtle, which in spite of its pleasant scent has a bitter taste. Esther was pleasant to the Jews, but bitterness itself to Haman and all who belonged to him. The name Esther is equally significant. In Hebrew it means, she who conceals. A fitting name for the niece of Mordecai, the woman who well knew how to guard a secret, and long hid her descent and faith from the king and the court. She herself had been kept concealed for years in the house of her uncle, withdrawn from the searching eyes of the king's spies. Above all, she was the hidden light that suddenly shone upon Israel in his rayless darkness. In build, Esther was neither tall nor short. She was exactly of average height, another reason for calling her myrtle, a plant which likewise is neither large nor small. In point of fact, Esther was not a beauty in the real sense of the word. The beholder was bewitched by her grace and her charm, and that in spite of her somewhat sallow, myrtle-like complexion. 67. More than this, her enchanting grace was not the grace of youth, for she was 75 years old when she came to court, and captivated the hearts of all who saw her, from king to eunuch. This was in fulfillment of the prophecy which God made to Abraham when he was leaving the home of his father. Thou art leaving the house of thy father at the age of 75. As thou livest, the deliverer of thy children in Media also shall be 75 years old. Another historical event pointed forward to Esther's achievement. When the Jews, after the destruction of Jerusalem, broke out into the wail, "We are orphans and fatherless," God said, "In very sooth, the Redeemer whom I shall send unto you in Media shall also be an orphan fatherless and motherless." 68. Ahasuerus put Esther between two groups of beauties, Median beauties to right of her and Persian beauties to left of her. Yet Esther's comeliness outshone them all. 69. Not even Joseph could vie with the Jewish queen in grace. Grace was suspended above him, but Esther was fairly laden down with it. 70. Whoever saw her pronounced her the ideal of beauty of his nation. The general exclamation was, "This one is worthy of being queen." 71. In vain Ahasuerus had sought a wife for 4 years. In vain fathers had spent time and money bringing their daughters to him, in the hope that one or the other would appeal to his fancy. None among the maidens, none among the women, pleased Ahasuerus. But scarcely had he set eyes upon Esther when he thrilled with the feeling that he had at last found what he had long yearned for. 72. All these years the portrait of Vashti had hung in his chamber. He had not forgotten his rejected queen, but once he beheld Esther, Vashti's picture was replaced by hers. 73. Maiden grace and womanly charm were in her united. 74. The change in her worldly position wrought no change in Esther's ways and manners. As she retained her beauty until old age, so the queen remained as pure in mind and soul as ever the simple maiden had been. All the other women who entered the gates of the royal palace made exaggerated demands. Esther's demeanor continued modest and unassuming. The others insisted that the 7 girl pages assigned to them should have certain peculiar qualities, as that they should not differ, each from her mistress, in complexion and height. Esther uttered no wish whatsoever. But her unpretending ways were far from pleasing to Hegai, chief of the eunuchs of the harem. He feared lest the king discover that Esther did nothing to preserve her beauty, and would put the blame for it upon him, an accusation that might bring him to the gallows. To avoid such a fate, he loaded Esther down with resplendent jewels, distinguishing her beyond all the other women gathered in the palace, as Joseph, by means of costly gifts lavished upon him, had singled out her ancestor Benjamin from among his brethren. Hegai paid particular attention to what Esther ate. For her he brought dishes from the royal table, which, however, she refused obstinately to ouch. Only such things passed her lips as were permitted to Jews. She lived entirely on vegetable food, as Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah had aforetimes done at the court of Nebuchadnezzar. 75. the forbidden tidbits she passed over to the non-Jewish servants. 76. Her personal attendants were 7 Jewish maidens, as consistently pious as herself, whose devotion to the ritual law Esther could depend upon. Otherwise, Esther was cut off from all intercourse with Jews, and she was in danger of forgetting when the Sabbath bath came around. She therefore adopted the device of giving her 7 attendants peculiar names to keep her in mind of the passage of time. The first one was called Hulta, workaday, and she was in attendance upon Esther on Sundays. On Mondays, she was served by Rakita to remind her of Rakia, the firmament, which was created on the 2nd day of the world. Tuesday's maid was called Genunita, garden, the 3rd day of creation having produced the world of plants. On Wednesday, she was reminded by Nehorita's name, the luminous, that it was the day on which God had made the great luminaries to shed their light in the sky. On Thursday by Rushita, movement, for on the 5th day the first animated beings were created. On Friday, the day on which the beasts came into being by Herfita, little Uelam, and on the Sabbath her bidding was done by Regoita, rest. Thus she was sure to remember the Sabbath day week after week. 77. Mordecai's daily visits to the gate of the palace had a similar purpose. Thus Esther was afforded the opportunity of obtaining instruction from him on all ritual doubts that might assail her. 78. This lively interest displayed by Mordecai in Esther's physical and spiritual welfare is not wholly attributable to an uncle's and guardian's solicitude in behalf of an orphan niece. A much closer bond, the bond between husband and wife, united them, for when Esther had grown to maidenhood, Mordecai had espoused her. 79. Naturally, Esther would have been ready to defend her conjugal honor with her life. She would gladly have suffered death at the hands of the king's bailiffs rather than yield herself to a man not her husband. Luckily, there was no need for this sacrifice, for her marriage with Ahasuerus was but a feigned union. God has sent down a female spirit in the guise of Esther to take her place with the king. Esther herself never lived with Ahasuerus as his wife. 80. At the advice of her uncle, Esther kept her descent and her faith a secret. Mordecai's injunction was dictated by several motives. First of all, it was his modesty that suggested secrecy. He thought the king, if he heard from Esther that she had been raised by him, might offer to install him in some high office. In point of fact, Mordecai was right in his conjecture. Ahasuerus had pledged himself to make lords, princes, and kings of Esther's friends and kinspeople, if she would but name them. Another reason for keeping Esther's Jewish affiliations a secret was Mordecai's apprehension that the fate of Vashti overtake Esther, too. If such were in store for her, he desired at least to guard against the Jews becoming her fellow sufferers. Besides, Mordecai knew only too well the inimical feelings entertained by the heathen toward the Jews, ever since their exile from the Holy Land, and he feared that the Jew haters, to gratify their hostility against the Jews, might bring about the ruin of Esther and her house. 81. Mindful of the perils to which Esther was exposed, Mordecai allowed no day to pass without assuring himself of her well-being. His compensation therefore came from God. Thou makest the well-being of a single soul they intimate concern. As thou livest, the well-being and good of thy whole nation Israel shall be entrusted to thee as thy task. 82. And to reward him for his modesty, God said, Thou withdrawest thyself from greatness. As thou livest, I will honor thee more than all men on earth. 83. Vain were the efforts made by Ahasuerus to draw her secret from Esther. He arranged great festivities for the purpose, but she guarded it well. She had an answer ready for his most insistent questions. I know neither my people nor my family, for I lost my parents in my earliest infancy. But as the king desired greatly to show himself gracious to the nation to which the queen belonged, he released all the peoples under his dominion from the payment of taxes and imposts. In this way, he thought, her nation was bound to be benefited. 84. When the king saw that kindness and generosity left her untouched, he sought to wrest the secret from her by threats. Once when she parried his inquiries in the customary way, saying, I am an orphan, and God, the Father of the fatherless in his mercy has brought me up, he retorted, I shall gather virgins together the second time. His purpose was to provoke the jealousy of Esther, for a woman is jealous of nothing so much as a rival. When Mordecai noticed that women were being brought to court anew, he was overcome with anxiety for his niece. Thinking that the fate of Vashti might have befallen her, he was impelled to make inquiries about her. 85. As for Esther herself, she was but following the example of her race. She could keep silent in all modesty, as Rachel, the mother of Benjamin, had had kept a modest silence when her father gave her sister Leah to Jacob for wife instead of herself, and as Saul the Benjamite was modestly reserved when questioned by his uncle, he told about the finding of his sheasses, but nothing about his elevation to the kingship. Rachel and Saul were recompensed for their self-abnegation by being given a descendant like Esther. 86.